I'm your host, Annie Bowles, and this is News du Jour. Welcome to News du Jour. You may be wondering, why am I, Annie Bowles, here hosting this podcast? I usually start by telling people I'm a political baby. You see, my parents met working on Capitol Hill. By the time I was 2, I had been in my first political commercial and even got lost crawling around the West Wing. Don't worry, Al Gore found me. My family then moved abroad when I was 9, and I attended an international school in Brussels with kids from all over the world. And it is this type of global perspective that I also bring to our show. I graduated from American University in DC after studying political science and art history, as well as interning on both sides of Capitol Hill. I even interned down the hall from where my parents met. I'm now pursuing a professional certificate in journalism at NYU in conjunction with Rolling Stone magazine. I guess I was always that friend in the group who cared deeply about not just what was going on politically, but also globally. I often kept my own friends informed through high school and into young adulthood, so I guess I've always done a version of this show. I'm genuinely passionate about following the news, and I'm here to break it down for you guys every weekday. We always strive to be a calmer space to get your news. Or, as one listener put it, like getting your news from a well-informed bestie. I'm so glad you're here. Over the weekend, we put on one of the most meaningful events of my career thus far, the large-scale floral installation adorned with the fattest, most glorious roses I have ever seen. It was totally magical. It ran all weekend, and I am exhausted, to say the least, between, last week we had the bill passing the House, and we had my Instagram Live with Tara Newell, and I've just had so many moving parts. I can't even summarize it in one sentence, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update on our bill as well. So now that we have passed both the Senate and the House, we are about halfway through the wait for our bill to become a law. As a reminder, things are now in the hands of Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt. He can decide on one of 3 things. Number 1, he can decide to sign the bill, effectively endorsing it, in which case it would immediately become a law. Number 2, he can decide to ignore it, in which case it would become a law on Wednesday of this week automatically. Number 3, he can choose to veto it, which would kill all of our efforts. So obviously that is the one thing we're hoping he doesn't do. We are praying every day, though, that he signs it. But another way to help get that done and encourage him to sign our bill is to call him at 405-521-2342 and politely ask whichever staffer answers the phone that Governor Stitt considers signing SB 1470 into law. Thank you guys so much for your support thus far. I'm sorry things have been so spotty on my end, and I will be sure to keep you posted on this. And we are getting back to our regularly scheduled programming at this point. Thank you guys so much for your patience. So for our mini stories, I have 2 for you guys. Then we're going to go over a bunch of different global conflict updates. And then we're going to discuss Mayorkas being off the hook and some updates on Trump's Manhattan trial. Let's jump in. So like I said, we're going to go ahead and start with 2 mini stories. First and foremost, at the end of last week, Taylor Swift put out a double album, you guys. Even as someone who really enjoys her music, it was a bit overwhelming. Her last album came out just a year and a half ago, so it feels like, between that and the Travis Kelce of it all and all of, the sort of reproducing of her albums. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around this, and a lot of people are saying this album is kind of like Folklore and Midnight's Had a Baby, and I have to say I agree so far. For me, I've said this before in this podcast, but it takes me weeks, if not like months, to fully absorb an album of hers and begin to understand her music. But so far, I'd like to say that this is an incredibly dark album. I think with the, sort of imagery she was putting out and the theme and title of the album, all of us were thinking it was going to be incredibly sad. And I'm sure there is sadness mixed in there, but the theme that I'm feeling so far is definitely like dark and twisty and just dark. But if you guys are interested in hearing more about which songs I'm liking and not liking, definitely message me. I know you guys have asked for that in the past, so I'm happy to put that together for you guys. But with a double album, I think it's going to take me a minute. I am overwhelmed and paralyzed every single time she puts out anything new, so I'm definitely feeling that even more so with this massive amount of new music and Beyonce's entire album to go through and Ariana Grande. There's just been a watershed moment of pop music, and I'm, sort of trudging through all of it right now, and I've been impressed by every single piece. A rainstorm in Afghanistan and Pakistan has killed over 130 people, you guys, with more rain on the way. More than 2,600 homes have been completely destroyed or damaged in Afghanistan alone, according to their Ministry of Disaster Management. We have a ton to go over in today's episode, which is why this is a mini story, but I'm hoping to circle back to this later in the week because, like I said, the rains are ongoing. So this is a disaster that is currently unfolding, and I will definitely try and recap it for you guys a little bit later on. And now we will jump into our global conflict updates. And I always have to issue a content warning here. This story involves war. So first and foremost, I want to discuss what happened at Columbia University. So Columbia University students had been peacefully protesting U.S. and Columbia University support of Israel by camping out in tents in the middle of the Quad. You see, Rafah and Gazans are forced to live in similar tent-like encampments because their homes have been destroyed by Israeli bombing. So the Columbia University students were camping there in the Quad in solidarity with Gazans living in even worse conditions. However, this past Thursday, police began arresting protesters who were refusing to leave the encampment. You see, the Quad was not made to be a campsite, and these students were not authorized to be living there. And yet, the students were peacefully protesting, so there's definitely this really serious gray area here that both Congress and these universities have been wrestling with. Imagery of students crying while being hauled away by NYPD were definitely not a good look for Columbia, and yet, asking the students to leave on their own was not working. The students were loaded into NYPD buses, you guys. They almost looked like school buses, but they were full-on New York City Police Department buses. But they also have, and by they, I mean the students, have repeatedly threatened that any action against them would simply lead to more demonstrations. So we'll definitely have to see what happens next. We'll be here to keep you guys posted. And for our next update, Israel strikes Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So a site has been struck in Iran, according to statements made by Iranian officials themselves. And though Israel has not publicly commented on the subject, it is widely believed that Israel was the one who hit this location in retaliation for Iran's barrage of missiles that it fired against them. Israel also struck 2 locations in Lebanon, killing 2 different Hezbollah commanders, but Israel did take accountability for those strikes publicly. And then that brings us to our next update, which is Israel strikes Rafah. So according to the AP, Israel commenced their attack on Rafah over the weekend, killing 22 people, 18 of which were children. These people were all a part of two families, and they were likely connected to Hamas. Netanyahu, though, has pledged that the attacks will continue as long as Hamas exists and holds Israeli hostages. So this is obviously something that we've talked about quite a bit on this show, that the U.S. pretty much opposes Israel doing anything in Rafah because of the civilian toll it will take almost intrinsically. So this is something we're going to be watching very closely. I do think it's notable that it began over the weekend when people aren't paying as close of attention to this kind of thing. So I will keep you posted throughout the week, and let's hope that things stay on a smaller scale and don't widen in Rafah. Next up, aid package passes for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. So if you guys remember, aid for Ukraine and Israel was being held up by Republicans in the House who were demanding that their speaker, Mike Johnson, not work with any Democrats in any way, shape, or form. That made passing this legislation close to impossible, but in particular, they were holding up the funding for Ukraine. That was what they were really focused on preventing. But Johnson said that following intelligence briefings, he realized the need for this legislation no matter what, and that he needed to be on the right side of history. So he got it passed in the House. And it actually was a $95 billion package, you guys, which also included funds for Israel and Taiwan. The bill received overwhelming bipartisan support, so it's something that looks like it's going to be passed. We'll definitely keep you guys posted. And lastly, for our global conflict updates for the day, the U.S. vetoes a Palestinian bid for full statehood at the UN. So over in the United Nations, the U.S. has opted to veto a resolution to change the status of the Palestinian territories, so Gaza and the West Bank, into full statehood for the UN. Both Britain and Switzerland actually abstained from voting in this, but 12 countries voted in favor. So that is it for global conflict updates for today. I will definitely keep you guys posted on all of these subjects. You know, everything is unfolding so quickly these days, and I'm here to keep you guys posted. That said, I have one more story that is like loosely related, but basically Alejandro Mayorkas is off the hook. So this is a very brief story, but Republicans essentially failed to come up with any evidence to substantiate their claims against Alejandro Mayorkas, and thus the Senate dismissed both articles of impeachment against the Secretary of Homeland Security and effectively shut down impeachment efforts against him. This is definitely a slap in the face to Republicans who wanted to impeach him, but Mayorkas, he's off the hook. And for our final story today, Trump's Manhattan trial has selected a jury. So a jury of 12 has been selected to try former President Donald J. Trump. But the craziest part I heard was that of the 96 original potential jurors, when they were asked if they could be fair or impartial to the former president, literally, you guys, 50 of them stood up and said no and were immediately excused. Over half said that they could not be impartial to Trump. And that is pretty par for the course, I would say. But apparently it was obvious to the press that President Trump was actually falling asleep during jury selection, which really cracked me up. I mean, this is the first day of his criminal trial, and he's legit falling asleep. And I think a number of members of the press were also amused by this. And it wasn't just like maybe he's asleep. It was like, no, he's like definitely asleep. He kept like, not only did he have his eyes closed, but he had his chin against his chest and kept kind of like startling awake, according to reporters for NPR. And it was also obvious to the press that he had lost a good amount of weight. And I have heard a lot of theories thrown around about why that might be. I'm going to let you guys come to your own conclusions on that. Nobody really knows the truth, but he has lost substantial weight. And then I do have to issue a content warning for this last little piece of news to do with the trial. This is violent if you want to skip ahead. But in a disturbing twist to this tale, a man set himself on fire, you guys, outside of the courthouse where Trump is being tried. The man threw pamphlets in the air before doing so and subsequently died of his injuries. The pamphlets had anti-government conspiracy theories inside of them. It was a tragic moment amid this completely unprecedented series of events. We'll definitely keep you guys posted on Trump's Manhattan trial, and that for today is the news du jour. Today, I wanted to leave you guys with the quote, "Living things still grow." If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use to listen. A rate and review on that platform or a shout out on social media would mean the world to us and help us to be able to keep creating the news du jour and reach more people who need a calmer space to consume the news. But the best way to support all of our work is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/sugarfree media, and that is also linked in our show notes. You can follow us on social media at newsdujour.podcast on both Instagram and TikTok. You can follow my personal account at It's Annie Bowles on both platforms as well. Any little noises you may hear in the background are my rescue pup. He has a little separation anxiety and always records with me. We appreciate you listening and look forward to telling you about the news again next time on News du Jour.
Broadcasting from Oklahoma.